What's up, everybody? Peepo again, and today's Method Monday is actually going to be about something that most people don't really understand or really care to learn properly, and that is what we're going over today, and that is track loops, or what most people call just loops. I call them track loops because, let's face it, they fill in the space where tracks would normally be. So it only makes sense to not try and confuse them with anything else. So they're basically what you see here, just loops that connect to the sidewall. And there's two ways that are pretty efficient that I tend to use. And one is where you actually use your fingers, or just one finger, and put it inside of the loop, and we'll go over it, but you put your finger in there and you string around your finger, and then it stays consistently the same size throughout the length of the pocket, basically. And that's really just for that first loop. And then the second version that I use, method, is that I call it a tug, and I'll get into detail when I'm doing it what I mean by that, but it's more or less not using anything but the string and the head to create the loop sizes, and more or less keep them consistent, is if you don't want to try and depend on the size of your finger being accurate. Big examples of pockets that use this sort of technique would be your classic big word, and what's actually based off of the big word is very popular, the Eagle's Nest. And then you have Max McCool's Turtle Shell, and then the revolving door, or door, if you want to pronounce it like that. But those are the most common pockets that you will see this sort of technique in. And the Eagle's Nest and the big word kind of take those to the extreme, and you connect more loops and more loops and more loops to the ones that you had just done. So it's basically just a bunch of loops attached to each other, and it's more or less used to create the effect of mesh while maintaining a leather pocket in the very middle of the head. So you have your two leathers. That's more often than not how they do the pockets. I've seen a few use four leathers, but because of the side leathers, they kind of get in the way of the loops, and then they're just kind of pointless to even be there. But so you're supposed to be able to have your traditional feel, traditional release from the middle because the leathers are there, and then you do X, O, pita, or just a zigzag like with a big word. Do whatever you want in the middle, and then the outside has all these multitudes of loops which will contact the ball much like mesh does. So it will have the cradling hold, the catching hold, and so on and so forth, that feel when the ball's in it. Otherwise, it feels pretty much just like a traditional. And it's used, again, in a lot of different ways. But, so, I usually don't recommend using this sort of thing if you really don't know your tension too well, because if one thing goes wrong, the whole pocket will go wrong, and that's a lot of different types of traditionals out there. But for this sort of one, if you screw up one string, if you screw up your first set of loops, your next set of loops are going to be screwed up. Or if this side's a little bit bigger loops than this side, you're not going to have proper tension connecting everything else. So it's going to become an issue later on. But so I'm going to get right into it. I already have a couple different ways done, and there's a couple different ways to do it, and with your knot actually attaching to it, where you can go, I really wish I could remember the name of the knot, but most people will recognize this knot because, I believe Throne of String uses it in his throne pockets. But so this is actually an over-under and an under-over knot instead of going a double wraparound knot that I usually do, which is actually right here. And then Yeah, that's really it. Those are the only two that you would normally use for this. I recommend for this type of pocket to use this first one right here. Okay, this one right here. And since it's a little hard to see, I'm going to be using pink so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. So more often than not, you're going to want one sidewall hole completely open, just like this one up here at the top of the screen. This is completely open. There's no string in there, nothing to get in the way, because if you're going to do this, you're going to have multiple strings to create multiple rows of loops. So you're going to need a nice big sidewall hole, or just a sidewall hole that can fit a couple different strings through it in order to do what you want. So for this one, this one is just going to keep it simple and have one string going through it, but later on you can figure out a few different techniques on how to not have actually knots or anything like that, to where the string is just there and kind of hooks around everything. But so we're going to get right into it. You come in through your sidewall hole from the outside in, and then what you're going to do is you're going to come around. We're going to pretend that we're not going to pretend, we're just going to do it. We're going to use our finger, and I'm going to use my trigger finger, and I'm going to go over the outside of the sidewall string and make sure everything's tight. And here's the trick when you're using your finger. If you want the knot to be even and the loop to remain constant and so on, try and have it so that your finger is still there, but the section of the sidewall string that you're actually using for this technique, the knot that you're creating after your finger is actually in the middle of that casting point. So I've set it up, my finger's in place, the tension's real good, then I come back out after I've got my tension correct, and then once I make this knot, it locks down said loop. See? Just locks down the loop. It's not going to really go anywhere because I kept the knot nice and tight after my finger. So let's do that one more time, and then we'll go into the next way to do this. So put my finger in place, make sure the previous knot that I just made doesn't shift around. Put my finger in place, outside in of the string, loop it around as if it's a single. Try and get it as close to the middle of that casting point as possible. Come back from the inside out. Make sure the string goes through that loop. And voila. 2 consistent, same size loops. And then I just continue on if I'm going to do it that way. Now, that's your fingers, the finger technique. Now we're going to go into what I like to call, again, the tug technique. So this one actually requires you not to use your finger at all. Not to put your finger in there or try and guess or anything. It's actually really easy. So what you do is you have your section here. You've done a knot, or you're coming from the beginning of the sidewall. You actually come down. Make sure your string is nice and tight. Come down. Do the same sort of knot, or whatever knot that you're doing, actually just before the next sidewall casting point. So this knot right here in the sidewall string, come just before that. Okay, make my first wrap around, come from the inside again to finish off the knot, and tighten the knot, but not too tight, and then shift the knot to the center of the casting point. Now it's not going to be as big as a loop as your finger one, because your finger's obviously going to be bigger, but I just created a very consistent, very even loop right there. Now I'm going to do it again, and this way is actually going to, there's actually 2 ways to do a tug. The tug, you can either leave it straight and continue on down and make another, oop, I did it backwards, oops. But so you continue down, you don't loosen it, you don't shift it back up, you come down, you make another one all the way down, all the way down the sidewall. But I'm only going to do it with 2. And then when you get, for the tug, for this version of the tug, all you do is you go all the way down nice and tight, and then you, from the bottom up, you kind of caterpillar it up. So it moves up, and they're all going to be relatively the same size, but they're actually going to slowly get smaller as you go down. And that's the thing. You don't want super huge loops at the bottom, especially in high school spec heads, but because it's just going to bunch up and it's all going to get in the way. It's not going to be really pretty looking or anything like that. Now, the next way to do it is actually, so you have, I just did this one, and I just moved it up, and then I go down and make my next one. Instead of having them all be tight, go down, this one's been created, been pulled back and made into a loop, go through, make my next knot nice and tight before the next casting point, and then I slowly start doing that over and over again. If you're going to do the tug, though, this is actually the way that I would recommend it, where you go down to each point, make it tight, make your knot, and then shift it to the center of the casting point, then go to the next one, so on and so forth. Just before the casting point, come back through, make sure it's nice and tight, tighten the knot, shift it up, and voila. Okay, so those are my 2 methods for how to do your loops, at least the first loop on your sidewall. Now after that, it's actually kind of a little sketchy on how to actually keep the loops even, but here's actually the trick. And this goes on if you're going to do 3 or 4 and then connect to the leathers or whatever. You actually take your next string, I'm going to use a gray one this time just to show you. What you're going to do now is just kind of ignore this top one just for now, and you're just going to do the same thing where you're going to center your knot on the loop. Okay, center your knot on the loop. Oop, lost my tip. Center your knot on your loop, do it, and ta-da. And then as you're going to each loop, just try and make it to where the string that's in between each knot is not perfectly straight, but has a very slight arch to it. So this is basically how I've always done it, and then it stays even pretty much the whole way down. I'll do another one just to show you. Kind of just short of straight. Hold it in place so it doesn't shift. Make my knot, and then pull on that center section where it was relatively straight, and the loops are even. So that's how you start doing your eagle's nest, your big word, all those fancy names. That's how you do your track loops, or aka loops. So hopefully this helps you guys out. This is actually a pretty fun one if you can get it down right, and then you can actually make some pretty fun pockets. So thanks for watching, guys. Like, comment, subscribe. If you feel that there's something that I missed or something that I need to do for the next one, feel free to share, and I'll probably include it into one of my next videos. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you later.